Hi, welcome to the Cold War Part 2. Well, these are the four stages we're going to divide the conflicts of the Cold War in. They are the same as in the book, and we're going to explain in this presentation, in this Part 2, the period corresponding to the beginning of the Cold War, from 1947 to 1953. The others are the Cold War 1953-1962, from 1963 to 1973, and the later stages of the Cold War from 1973 to its end, 1991. These are all the conflicts we are going to analyze. They are divided in the very same stages I just mentioned, and it is the green ones, the ones we are going to explain right now. The Greek Civil War, the Berlin blockade, the victory of Mao in China, and the Korean Civil War, which mark the beginning, the real beginning of the Cold War. These are it. I'm going to talk firstly about the Greek Civil War. Actually, the Greek Civil War was the continuation after World War II. It never ended. What happened after the World War II in Greece was a civil war. Who's fighting in this civil war? We're going to have the communist insurgents, the partisans, fighting, supported by Yugoslavia and indirectly supported also by the Soviet Union. These communists are fighting against the Greek monarchist government, which is an army backed initially by the United Kingdom. Well, we've talked about the Truman doctrine already, and in 1947, since 1947, this doctrine was announced, and the first place in which it's going to really start working is going to be Greece. Truman said that the US had to do something to stop the expansion of the communism, and that something in Greece is going to be providing aid. Aid to whom? It's going to be military and financial help to the Greek pro-government troops, the anti-communist troops. What's going to be the outcome? How it's going to end? It's going to end with the Greek, with the communist Greek defeat. Another one, it's not in the book, but I want to mention it, is the Iran. It's the second intervention of the Cold War. All of them are indirect interventions. What happened in Iran is that Iran was a really rich country in oil, as it is nowadays. It had been occupied during the war by the Soviets and by the British. And what happened now is that the Americans are going to force the Soviets to retreat from Iran. We're going to talk now about the Berlin blockade, which is the second conflict of this period. The blockade of Berlin was the conflict which really sealed the world in two opposed blocks. It is very important because of this. After World War II, the Allies occupied Germany and divided it into four zones, as you know. The Soviet, the American, the British, and the French zone, as you can see in this map. Even though Berlin was in the Soviet zone, you can see it here, it was also divided in four parts. Even though it was 160 kilometers away from the American part, it was also divided in these four parts. In 1948, the growing distance between the Western countries and the Soviets led to the first to celebrate the London Conference. In this conference, they are going to announce the unification of the three German zones into only one. All the Allied zones are going to become just one. This created a only double, not divided in four, but only double division. division, which is going to be the Western Allied zone and the Soviet zone. The Soviet Union saw this decision as a threat, and the response they're going to give is going to start a blockade. They wanted to pressure the Western countries on their decision, so they undo what they did in the London Conference. This blockade consisted in Soviets blocking all the supplies of water, food, and everything arriving from the west to the Berlin non-Soviet areas. But what happened? The Western Allies are going to supply West Berlin through a massive airlift. An airlift is un puente aéreo. The Americans are going to do more than 200,000 trips in order to supply this West Berlin with the different food or water objects they may need during the blockade. Well, if the blockade started in 1948, it's gonna finish in May of the next year, 1949. During all this time, there was a really fear of a nuclear attack because the tension was growing. So people, the world, very having very present, having very close the World War II, the people was afraid of what could happen in between these great forces. But well, it's in 1949 the Soviet Union is going to end the blockade. However, the result of the crisis is going to be the definite division of Germany in the Federal Republic of Germany, the FRG, also known as the West Germany, and the German Democratic Republic, or the GDR, or also known as the East Germany, which is going to last and remain like this, divided like this in these two Berlins up to the end of the war, of the Cold War. We also have to talk about the Chinese conflict. The end of the Chinese Civil War is going to have an effect. Actually, well, we have to talk a little bit about what happened before to understand what's going on in China. The Chinese Civil War really started in 1927 and lasted to 1949. In this Civil War, in the last steps, in the last stage of the Civil War, two main parties are going to fight. The Chinese National Party, or the Kuomintang, by Chiang Kai-shek, led by the leader Chiang Kai-shek, and the second party, the Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong. But actually, for understanding the conflict, as I said, we have to talk a little bit about what's going on before. The war started actually before, far from even World War II, or linked to the colonialist occupation of China. The last emperor was deposed and the war exploded with the absence of power. A lot of people were fighting for the new government, the liberals, the imperials, the socialists, the communists. And in this context, Japan burst in, remember the Japanese expansion, and took control of the country until Japan is defeated in World War II. In this moment, when Japan is defeated in World War II, all the Chinese were fighting together for liberating China from the Japanese. But the U.S. government met in secret with the liberal leader. We said he's called Chiang Kai-shek, trying to force that the definite government of China is going to be something, close to the mindset of the United States, close to capitalism. But when the rest of the country heard about this, the communists are going to fight back and are going to oppose. In 1945, after getting rid of the Japanese together, and after this meeting, there's gonna start the Chinese Socialist Revolution. From 1945 to 1949, these two parties, the Kuomintang and the Communist Party, are gonna fight for the power. And by 1949, the revolution is won, and Mao Zedong, which is the same as Mao Zedong, just in case you heard the different names, proclaimed the People's Republic of China. Up to nowadays, it is exactly the same People's Republic of China as nowadays. 1 year later, in 1950, China and the Soviet Union are going to sign the Sino-Soviet Treaty Friendship. This Treaty of Friendship is going to be seen as a diplomatic problem. It is a diplomatic triumph for the Soviet Union, but it is a problem for the Western countries. As you know, China is the most populated country of the world and is now part of the communist bloc. This period is going to be the Korean War, or the War of Korea. The same year, it's the same year as the Sino-Soviet Treaty. What happens? Well, Korea was the first military conflict of the Cold War between the blocs, so it is really significant. Korea was part also of the Japanese Empire before the World War II. At the end of the war, it was invaded by the Allies. The Americans enter through the south, and the Soviets enter through the north. In 1945, the country is divided in two parts. Over the parallel, you can see it in the map, over the parallel 38 degrees north. In 1949, both armies retreated and the Korean Peninsula remained divided, creating two different countries: North Korea, which was a communist country supported by the Soviets, and South Korea, which was a capitalist country supported by the Western countries and the US especially. Well, months after the victory of the communist Chinese of Mao Zedong in 1950, what happened? North Korea, which is going to feel that it's the time for expanding the communist, feeling that China is now a communist country, they're gonna feel strong enough and they're gonna invade South Korea. The Americans are gonna react really firmly and are gonna be able to convince the United Nations to intervene. And the UN peacekeeping forces are gonna really be sent to try to end the conflict. It is actually the first United Nations intervention in a war, and after its creation, since World War II, is the first time these UN forces, are going to really intervene. So the UN forces, led by the USA, began to counterattack and recover the lost territories of South Korea. However, the American troops went beyond containment and went further, invaded North Korea, winning territories that were too close to China, to the Chinese border. At this point, China announced its support to North Korea. Well, there is a general, a US general, maybe you know about him. It's Douglas MacArthur, who is going to go too far. He's going to arrive too far and suggest using the nuclear weapons against China, and continue, not stop, but continue with the invasion. The world trembled completely. At the height of tension, finally, MacArthur was dismissed. The world could breathe again. In 1953, the Korean Armistice Agreement, which is the peace, el armisticio, not complete peace, armistice, which is a how can we say, a peace for a while. It's gonna be signed. It established two separate states divided by the Korean demilitarized zone, and this zone is going to be controlled by the UN. This line still exists today. It is as well very close to the parallel 38. The UN forces that we said it intervened in this war lost 150,000 casualties from all over the world. This was a very international army. Most of the dead were Americans, but there were casualties from British, Australia, Canada, France, the Netherlands, Peru, Philippines, Greece. As I said, it is the first intervention of the UN. Well, as you know, this line, this demilitarized zone still exists today. South Korea has, up to nowadays, a democratic regime with a capitalist economy, which is very close to the Western world, while North Korea is ruled by a communist dictatorship. Pictures. I wanted to bring you some pictures. This one of the two soldiers is quite well known, and this man here is General MacArthur. This is the end of part 2.